Number 8.
Please note that when this happened, I was 7 or 8 years old. I am now an 18-year-old female, and I still have yet to return where this happened. Please also bear in mind, where I live, there used to be no crime. I won't lie and say that we didn't have the occasional theft and break-in, but nothing extreme like murders and rapes or things like that. So as I'm telling you that I used to go and run and play in the woods, please don't think that my parents were bad ones or anything like that. Like I said, low crime rates, so my parents didn't feel the need to worry. So on to my story. My 2 best friends at the time, Jess and Emma, and I used to go into the woods by my house to play and make dens. In case you don't know what they are, they're places that you can hide in and play that you can make secluded, sort of like a fort. We had our own den that we went to regularly, and we played in there for hours before it got dark and we had to go home. At that age, we believed in aliens and ghosts, like big time believers, especially Jess. One day, we were in our den that was pretty secluded from the outside, away from any trails, and you could only see into it from the entrance, which wasn't that big. We talked about the regular things 7 and 8-year-olds talk about, along with ghosts and aliens. Jess sat facing the entrance and us, while Emma and I sat facing Jess. We were laughing and joking around when, suddenly, we heard rustling in the bushes. We stopped and were quiet for a few seconds, trying to listen, when Jess suggested that it was an alien. We laughed, too young to realize the danger that we could have possibly been in, and carried on messing around. After a few minutes, the incident was forgotten until it happened again. Jess suggested an alien again, but this time Emma looked a little uncomfortable. We carried on playing for another 5 minutes when, suddenly, Jess had a look of pure terror on her face. Emma and I stopped talking and looked at Jess, who was looking at something over our shoulders. We slowly turned around, and I'll never forget what I saw that day. Standing about 10 feet away was a man standing behind a bush. The bushes were tall, but we caught a glimpse of him from the top of his head down to his nose. He was a white man with a bald head and wrinkles in his forehead. What made me remember him so vividly, though, were his eyes. They were pitch black. Even from 10 feet away, I could tell that his eyes were a solid black. We watched him for about 10 seconds before he realized that he'd been caught. Then he turned and ran. We wasted no time. We got up and ran too. We ran as fast as we could, all the way back to Emma's house, since hers was the closest, and we ran into her room. We then talked about what had just happened, and Jess drew what we saw. Emma and I confirmed that it was the same thing. We never told anybody for fear that they'd call us all liars. Jess was convinced that it was an alien. Emma, on the other hand, didn't share what she thought. I had no idea, slightly agreeing with Jess. Now, 10 years later, my belief in aliens and ghosts has become nothing more than childhood memories. Thinking about it now, aged 18, it makes me wonder if this was a guy who heard little girls laughing and wanted to check them out, or maybe worse. Who knows what could have happened that day, but I'm sure as hell glad that Jess spotted him when she did. Knowing he was watching us the entire time, to this day, still gives me the creeps.
Number 7.
So I live in a small town, one of those everybody knows everybody type places. I work at our local Wendy's, and my normal shift is from about 2 or 3 in that afternoon to about 12:30ish or 1 o'clock at night. I've been doing this for about 8 months, but what happened made me get my schedule completely changed. I do a lot of volunteering at the local elementary schools and at church. Now, this may not seem very important, but I tell you this so that you know that I know just about every child in this town. See, I left work a little after 1 a.m. and started driving home. The way to my house is past about 4 large crop and cattle fields. It was a Wednesday night, and with school finished up, you can understand my surprise when I saw 2 children walking down the side of the road. Now, as I said earlier, I knew just about every kid here, and these 2 didn't even look familiar. The youngest was a boy, I'd say maybe first grade age. He had a blonde bowl cut and was wearing what looked like jeans and a plain shirt. The oldest was a girl, I'd say 5th or 6th grade age, and she had curly brown shoulder-length hair and was wearing a dress. The kind you stick your child in for a few hours on an Easter Sunday and throw away because of all the mud and grass stains. I pulled over and rolled down my window some and asked them, "Are you kids alright?" They didn't look at me, they just kept looking down. The older one responded, "We're fine, but we could use a ride home." "Where are your parents? You should be home. It's late and you have school tomorrow," I said to them. "Our parents are at home. Take us to them." I found myself wanting to let them in, but at the same time, I was kind of terrified. But the girl spoke calm and clear, her voice was soothing, and I just wanted to help them. "What are your names?" I asked. "Let us in and take us home," she said. "Why aren't you already home?" I asked. "Let us in and take us home," she said again, this time sounding angry. "What's your mum's number? Let me call her. I'm sure she's worried about you," I say, trying my hardest to stay calm and hold my ground. But there was a voice in my head saying that they wouldn't hurt me, they're just kids. Just as I started to reach over and unlock the door, she looked up, and I saw it. Her eyes were all black. It was like a spell was broken, and I felt myself scream. The kids started banging on the window, pulling on the door, demanding I let them in. I hit the gas and took off, looking back a moment later, and the kids were gone. Almost like they'd never been there. I had never heard of black-eyed children till after my encounter with them, and I sure hope that I never see them again.
Number 6.
As a child, I really enjoyed going to the mountains with my parents and my grandmother. We would escape the hot, crowded city and head up to the mountains. We stayed in my grandmother's house. It was a really small old house on top of a hill, and it faced a huge forest. The house was built a really long time ago. It was my second day in the house, and it had been a really long day, so we went to bed early. The room I slept in was very far from my parents' room, and it was closer to the dining area, which is at the end of the house, and right behind it there was a wall. I fell asleep quickly and I woke up from a really loud bang behind me, but I didn't wake up in the same room I slept in. Instead, I woke up in the dining room, sitting on the floor with my back against that wall and my feet crossed. I stood up really quickly and ran to my parents' room before I went back to sleep, where I checked the time, and it was about 5 and the sun hadn't completely risen yet. When I woke up, I sat in the living room and thought about what had happened last night. I asked my mother if I'd ever sleptwalked before, and she said no. My grandmother said, "Your father used to sleepwalk, only in this house though. Every single day, I would wake up to find him sitting cross-legged against that wall." She laughed, and so did I, but I was freaking out inside. Being an 8-year-old girl who was trying to act brave, I decided not to tell my parents about what had happened. Things continued to happen for the next 2 days, so I decided to set up a camera on top of my bed and next to the wall to see what was happening during my sleep. I checked the video recording when I woke up the next day, and what I saw was terrifying. The camera set on top of my bed filmed me crawling from my bed and out of my room like a little baby, while the camera next to the wall filmed me sitting down, and it seemed like I was talking to someone. I said things like, "No, I can't hear you well. No, I can't let you in." I asked something like, "Who are you?" during my sleep, and the camera stopped recording right when I asked that question. I had to show my parents the recordings. My father had this frightened look on his face. My grandmother and my father sat me down and showed me drawings my father drew when he was 7 years old. My father explained the drawings. Most of the drawings were a stick figure representing my dad standing in front of that wall, and on the other side of that wall was a figure which looked like a woman. Some of the drawings were just scribbles, and others were drawings of him being somewhat dragged by some scribbles. At the time, my grandmother thought nothing of them. Things were getting weirder every day. Sometimes we would be sitting in the living room and we would hear a song being played on a piano. We didn't think too much of it, as we thought it might be the neighbors or something. Other times, I would hear somebody calling my name. Things would disappear around the house and we would recognize hundreds of little bumps on the wall. I became really sick for more than 2 weeks. In fact, so sick that some days I couldn't get out of bed. And that was when we decided to leave. A couple of days before us leaving, my grandmother saw some dirty greyish water dripping down the wall, which made the house smell unbearable. We thought it might be a dead animal, so we got someone to break down the wall. What we saw scares me to this day. We called the police and we were asked to evacuate the house. Behind the wall, there was a hidden staircase which went below ground level, leading to a room. Police officers came out of the house carrying tons of candles and a decaying squirrel which was in a bucket of water on the stairs, tons of Ouija boards and lots of huge books with weird writings. There were also scary things like a big old decaying doll and an old dress with a weird dried up orange reddish liquid on it which we thought was blood, and an old heavy piano. We were asked a couple of questions by the officers like if these things were ours and when did we move into the house, etc. We drove back to the city and the case went on for more than 3 months. The owner of the house was interviewed and eventually the case was solved. It turns out that the house I was staying in had a room which the owner used to contact his dead wife. The dress with the stains is hers. Apparently, rituals and black magic also occurred in that room, and the owner had access to that room and would come every week to do rituals without us even knowing. The story spread very quickly in this small town and became known by almost everyone. Growing up, I became extremely paranoid, and this story haunts me until today. I always wanted to share this story, but I always hesitated. We never brought up the story of that house again, and we decided to move on.
Number 5.
Bath salts sure do make for a creepy encounter. Outside where I work, there's a little landscaped area. One afternoon, I happened to glance out there, and there was a man laying face down on the grass. He was just wearing a pair of shorts in the cold, no shoes, and just face planted down. I went to get a co-worker to show them, but in the time it took me to come back, he had moved. He was slowly pulling himself forward on his forearms, his entire lower body limp, and legs and torsos just dragging behind him. The entire time, his head was sort of shaking and bobbing as he pulled himself along. He got to the edge of the landscaped area and pulled himself over the foot drop, landing limp on the pavement, facing the wall. My co-worker starts to call 911, thinking the guy is hurt, but something about him kept us from going out to him. Just as the emergency people get on the line, he suddenly flips over on his other side, staring directly at us. His face was a twisted smile, like every muscle in his face was strained, his eyes wide open. Still staring at us with the strained smile, he pulled himself up onto his knees and held his arms forward as though he was reaching for us. Emergency services said that they would send someone around, but no sooner had she hung up, the guy started moving quickly. He sort of raised one leg, lunging forward, dragging one knee along the pavement, then lunged the other knee, pulling himself forward. The whole time, one arm stayed pointed at us, while the other moved in strange angles. He quickly headed around the side of the building, but as he went, he was ripping his knees open on the pavement. So as he disappeared around the corner, his legs were covered in blood, and the whole time he was still pointing, still staring with that creepy smile. We rushed back and filled in our co-workers, but suddenly we hear a loud banging noise from the back of the building. I peer out the back door and find him hanging from the door to the dumpster. He was dangling there, propelling himself forward, slamming his head and shoulders into the metal side of the dumpster again and again. Finally, he is bleeding from his head and drops down off the door. He grabbed a length of wood from the ground and turned. He locked eyes with me, and that creepy, unblinking smile returned. Suddenly, he bent backwards at the waist, shrieked in a high-pitched voice, and whirled toward me. I noped backwards quickly and locked the door behind me. A co-worker is updating emergency services on the situation when we hear a car alarm go off. From the side window, we see the guy destroying a co-worker's car. He is still bent backwards at the waist, looking up towards the sky. His arms are limp, but he's still clutching the lumber. He would whirl around, each time the momentum slamming the lumber into the car, eventually cracking the passenger car window. He then straightens up, turns, smiles at us, and points right at us before dropping limp to the ground. He lays there in a heap for a moment, then flipped over and crawled limp-legged under the car. He was there when the police arrived, and they had to grab him by the feet and pull him out, ragdoll limp, eyes staring. One cop was trying to talk to the guy, when suddenly he shrieked again and lunged for the cop. I couldn't see it happening from the inside, but apparently he even bit the cop. The cops restrain him, and eventually an ambulance arrives. The guy is basically restrained down to a gurney by his hands and feet, and another cop is taking our statements nearby, when suddenly the guy somehow manages to pull his torso off of the gurney, pulling his head up to look at me, and says, "Hi." The cops followed up a week later, and apparently the guy was on bath salts and was checked into the hospital. Criminal charges were laid because of the damage to the car. Jump forward 6 months and I'm heading into work one day when I notice someone is sitting on a bench in the landscaped area and realize that it's the same guy. His entire body is shaking violently as he stares ahead. I call the cops, but by the time they get there, he had disappeared. I sure hope that he gets the help he needs, but I dread I'll see him again.
Number 4.
I love staying up late. Watching television until 3 a.m. is my bread and butter. Suffice to say that this is a usual thing for me when I'm home alone. With my dad going away for work every 2 weeks and coming home for one, it was really easy for me to get away with it while I was still in school. And for context, I live with just my dad, as my mum passed away from cancer when I was only 12. But I wasn't completely alone though. I had a tuxedo cat with the most fitting moniker, Tuxedo. I've had him since I turned 16, and he's kept me company during the many long Canadian winter nights when I was by myself. His 2 favourite places to sit were the small red couch on the right side of the television and the small table that was placed in front of the large living room window. I also occupied the big red couch right in front of the television. One more important thing to note is that my dad always insisted I close the curtains on the large living room window when it became nighttime. To him, he thought it was dangerous to let people see into the house and could tempt them to break in. But in my mind, I always figured no one would be dumb enough to break into a house with lights on instead of a house with no lights on at all. So I usually just left them open the entire 2 weeks he was away because laziness. So on this particular night, I was watching a documentary. I think it was about some couple being held hostage somewhere in Australia. These certain documentaries would be on very late, which wasn't a problem for an 18-year-old me in the slightest. Tuxedo obviously felt differently, as he had chosen to gaze outside the living room window instead. As it just entered commercial break, Tuxedo started giving soft cries as his eyes were staring in the direction of the front door, which was on the left side of the window. He usually does this if he sees someone outside of the door, which was more commonly done during the day than the night for obvious reasons. It was actually very out of the ordinary for Tuxedo to do this so late. At first, I assumed it might have been an outdoor cat or wild rabbit by the door or something, but I could tell Tuxedo's wail for especially worrisome, so I decided to check it out for myself. Here's the layout of my front door entrance. Tuxedo and I were on the top floor, but the entrance was at the lower level that was between the top floor and the basement. There was a small staircase that went down from the top floor towards the front door, and a second small staircase that went further down away from the door to the basement. Hopefully that was a good explanation of it. So I'm standing at the top of the staircase, about to go down and open the door to see for myself, when I see a large shadowy figure in the frosted glass of my front door. I nearly collapsed to the ground when I saw this. It was definitely not my dad, and at 11 p.m. at night, it was certainly not something I expected to see. I could tell whoever this was had something in the door and was trying to pry it open. At that moment, something came over me that I can't explain. It might have been the fact that I knew that I had no one in the house to help me, or the fact that I felt urgency to protect Tuxedo from this intruder. But I grabbed my cell phone off the arm of the couch and threw on the lights over the front door. The shadowy figure was now fully visible and clearly startled as our eyes met through the frosted glass, his face displayed in jagged reflection. "Leave now! I'm calling the police! Leave!" I didn't even get to finish before he was dashing off my yard and into a car across the street. Before I could even tell the make and the model, let alone a license plate, he was gone. All that remained was a crude crowbar on the front step. Now, it's up for debate what that man was at my house for. I certainly didn't recognize him in the few seconds I looked at him. While this definitely shattered my imagined immunity from danger if the lights were still on, part of me wonders if he might have still attacked if I wasn't awake that night. One thing is for sure though, Tuxedo saved my life that night. I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if Tuxedo wasn't looking out the window that night.
Number 3.
For starters, I'm an 18-year-old female, and I was with my best friend, who was also a female of the same age. We've been best friends since elementary school, and we always try to spend all of our free time with one another. We've had numerous creepy encounters that I someday plan to share, but I think this particular encounter is a better fit here. So, this is what happened. When my friend Kelly got out of school, we planned on going to a local swimming area and hiking the nearby trails. It's usually pretty secluded at said swimming area, and we were actually the only people there upon arrival. And honestly, I've never felt unsafe there. When we reached our destination, we got out of a van, locked the doors, and began to stroll through the wooded trails. As we hiked, we chatted about what is currently going on in our everyday lives like we normally do. We weren't very familiar with this particular trail we were walking on, and we were curious to see where it led. We walked for quite a while until we reached what we thought was just a clearing, but it was actually just another body of water, and where our trail came to a halt. We realized that we could do a U-turn and walk on the mushy sand bordering the water all the way back to where her van was parked rather than cutting back through the woods. So that's what we decided to do, and I am so thankful for that decision. We continued our chat as we walked back toward her vehicle. The walk was lengthy, but it wasn't until we were already almost back that we heard someone in the woods next to us. Just to quickly clarify our surroundings, the woods were to our left and the water was on the right. Straight ahead was the swimming area and Kelly's vehicle. We could hear a male's voice, but his words were jumbling together. We couldn't make out exactly what he was saying. We sped up a little, simply because we were completely secluded from civilization. It was only Kelly, myself, and whoever was in the woods beside us. I had my phone to my side, in case I needed to call for help. It was a huge comfort, to say the least. We tried to stay quiet as we walked around the bend where her van was parked. We began to hear multiple male voices as we crept toward her van. We soon realized that there was a small car parked right beside hers, and there were 3 men surrounding it, all on different sides. We watched as a 4th man exited the trail Kelly and I had first hiked through. We immediately knew that he was the one we had been hearing in the woods. All of the men were different ages. 3 of them were very obviously older men, and the other one looked to be around 30 years old. When they noticed us, they quickly silenced themselves and began to stare. At this point, I was ready to sprint to her car. I tried convincing myself that I was overreacting, as I suffer with anxiety and usually overthink things. I mean, what's weird about 4 grown men hanging around a swimming area with no fishing poles, wearing normal clothes, staring right at us, and surrounding my friend's vehicle? When we finally reached her van, my heart was pounding. They never stopped looking at us, and we were only around 7 feet away from them. If they had wanted to do anything, here was their chance. My friend opened her door, and of course, began having trouble unlocking the passenger side door. I stood impatiently by the passenger side door, praying to hear the unlock sound. I kept checking behind myself in fear that they would sneak up behind me, and to my horror, that's exactly what one of the men was doing. This man was the one who had been in the woods next to us. He was approaching her vehicle very quickly. The door finally unlocked at this moment, and I flung the door open, practically throwing myself inside. He passed her vehicle, and we locked the doors. Then, we noped the heck away from there. As I watched in the rearview mirror, their eyes never left our direction. We parked, hidden of course, to see what their next move was going to be, and it was only a moment after we left that they did too. On our way back to my house, Kelly confided in me that the man who had been approaching me was holding something in his hand as he crept up behind me. What it was, I'm not too sure, and to be honest, I think I would rather not figure it out. It's terrifying to think of what may have happened had Kelly and I went back the way we had come. We would have met this man face to face in the woods, and no one else would have been around. I'm really not sure what these guys' intentions were, but I would rather not meet them again to find out.
Number 2.
I live in a small town in western Missouri, a wooded area surrounding a lake. I live in a very conservative area, and everyone knows each other, considering the town I live in is about the size of a theme park. I'm one of 3 triplets. There's me, my sister Diana, and our deceased sister Mina. Diana was born first, then me, but something went wrong during the birth of our younger sister, and she ended up passing away a few hours after birth. Myself and Diana are 2 of 6 kids, So my parents are pretty busy dealing with the others to keep us in check 24/7, so me and Diana can pretty much do whatever we want, to a limit. We share the basement as a bedroom, being as there's no other open rooms in our house. One of the windows leads to the backyard, and the other leads to the street in front of our house. A few years ago, at around 1 or 2 a.m, myself and Diana were staying up late watching a movie, when suddenly we heard a few knocks on the window to our backyard. We ignored it, figuring it was just our minds playing tricks on us, but moments later, the knocks came again, all in even threes. After a while, the knocks went away, and we decided it would be a good idea to head off to bed. A week later, I was going to the movies with my girlfriend, Kaden, and she dropped me off when the date was over. I quietly walked inside, making my way to my room when I saw Diana sitting on her bed, bawling her eyes out. I walked over, quickly wrapping her in a hug as I asked her what was wrong. "I heard them again," she muttered. "The knocks." I rolled my eyes, letting out a relieved breath that she wasn't hurt. "Dee, it was probably just the house settling, or maybe it was just Mason, that's our brother, messing with you." I pleaded, and she shook her head no. She quickly walked over to the drywall, one of the few spots in our room that wasn't covered in posters or furniture. "It sounded like this," she whispered, and banged hard on the wall 3 even times. The noise startled me, and I stood up. "Dee, stop! You're gonna wake up Mum and Dad." She stopped, nodding. About 20 minutes later, I managed to convince her that it was just her imagination, and she decided to go to sleep. But unlike her, I couldn't sleep that night, so I just laid awake, staring at the wall by my bed. At about 3 a.m, she sat up straight in bed, almost like a possessed person in a horror movie, and just sat, staring at the wall. "Dee?" I called, sitting up too. She didn't answer. "Diana?" I called again. She turned her head, looking at me straight in the eyes. I could only see the outline of her face, but I just knew that she was staring straight at me. I started feeling uncomfortable, and I slid back against my headboard, and she slowly began to whimper, sounding like she was about to cry. "It's right next to you," she whispered, and I felt my whole body tense, goosebumps riddling my arms and legs as my blood went cold. "Diana, what the fuck is wrong with you?" I growled. I went to take off the covers to go turn on the lights when she stopped me with a loud, "No, don't, move. Jay, please. It's right next to you." I felt like I was about to vomit, my teeth clamping down on each other. The atmosphere around me changed. The air grew cold. I knew Diana wasn't lying. Why would she? I was too scared to check. I moved back into my sleeping position and let myself drift, just as Diana ordered me to do so. It was difficult to sleep that night. The next morning, I woke up to a burning sensation on my upper thigh and on my stomach. I went to the bathroom and stripped in front of the mirror, revealing scratches. I quickly grabbed my phone and took some pictures, pulling my clothes back on and walking over to Diana, who was already awake and playing on her phone. I sat down. "Diana," I started, dreading to ask, "what did you see last night?" She gave me a confused look before sitting up. "What do you mean?" she asked, and I explained to her what I had just explained to you and showed her the pictures. She froze and her body went completely pale. She explained to me that she thought it was a dream, that she doesn't remember doing any of that other than watching it happen like a dream. I asked her again, "So, what did you do in the dream then? What was standing by my bed?" "The devil," she answered. I've never been a believer in God or hell or anything of that sort. The reason being, just plain science. Neither was she, which is why I grew concerned. She explained to me what the devil really looked like. He doesn't have horns or hooves, as she explained. It was a woman in a dress with long black hair, her jaw unhinging from her scowl as her tomb-like black eyes choked through her face. She had scratches, she said, all over her face. She said it was reaching towards me and screaming, growling, making this gargled, choking sound. Now, being almost 16, I still don't go to church and I don't pray, but I sure as hell believe in something. Maybe not God, but what the fuck was in my room?
Number 1.
As I dangled there, hanging on for dear life and my brain going into overdrive from what just happened, One could assume that I had one of those life flashes by moments, but I didn't. And if you think my dear old nemesis the darkness gave me some relief in that moment, think again. I couldn't see a thing. It was also very quiet, like I was in a vacuum. I couldn't even hear the distant roar of the sea. I suddenly realized that, in the action, I dropped my torch in the void below, and remembered hearing a deafening crunch as the light immediately went out, much to my dismay. I was alone, and helpless, dangling there like a fool. And that laugh, what was that laugh? I'd never heard anything like it before. I'd never heard something so sinister. So much so that the thought of it chilled me to the bone. It was then that I realized that I was scared, like real scared. Like fear of the unknown scared. I had no idea who, or even what, could be nearby, or indeed, right in front of me. It was like waking up and experiencing severe sleep paralysis, except this seemed so realistic. It was real, wasn't it? I chuckled to myself. I must be going mad, but I can't move. My body's in shock and hanging on for survival. I need to move. I need to get out of here. Okay, relax and breathe. I whispered to myself, puffing my cheeks, trying to regulate my oxygen. You've got this. After some focused breathing exercises, I finally found I was able to start twitching my muscles again. I focused my inner energy and thrust my body into a motion, which put in place a momentum and allowed me to hook my arm onto the ledge. I now had some more leverage, and used this to put my other arm up and used my upper body strength to hoist myself up. I then took a moment to sit there and gather my sanity, before pulling out my phone and activating its flashlight and shining it in the direction of my near plunge. It looked like the entirety of the second floor, other than the first bit of the corridor I came from, was non-existent, like it had never even been built, which was weird, considering that there were doors to rooms just suspended in the air. I decided I'd been sat down long enough and stood up. The others then came to my mind, and my eyes focused on the time display on my phone. I'd been in this building for 45 minutes. It was about time that I should start heading back to the meet point to join up with the others. I wanted to get out of the area, pronto. I started making my way downstairs to find my torch, feeling a mix of emotions due mainly to the coming down of my adrenaline. My body felt sore and flat from the physical demand of hanging for a short while, then using reserve energy to hoist myself back up. But my head was still mindful of the fact that I was in unfamiliar territory and had better get to safety. I presented a defiant mood though, as I didn't want the night to end. So I decided I wouldn't tell the others of my fall and the voice. A mistake, I know. Hindsight is both a blessing and a curse. When I got downstairs, I found my torch midway down the central corridor. The top of its twist lid had come loose in the fall, and it chips and scratches to its aluminium body, but otherwise it looked perfectly fine and still functioned perfectly when reassembled. This trip, and my remaining time within the big premises, remained uneventful as I continued to the room with the now broken weight machine, and hoisted myself up and out of the window. From the outside, it must have looked like I was crawling desperately out of a black hole, eager and keen to escape the horrors that were after me, and leave that place firmly behind, never to return. I won't miss you. As soon as I had jumped out of the window and started walking to the middle, I had torches upon me, one of them robbing my vision of the path ahead. I figured it was A and B, shining their torches to verify that it was me and not some random stranger. "Alright, you can turn your torches off now, you know it's me," I hissed as they refused to put their torches away. "Calm down, we're only checking you're not a murderer coming to chop us up," B said. "We've been here 10 minutes. My building was uneventful and nothing of special interest. What about you, A? Anything pique your interest?" I thought I'd best be polite and take some interest and see if the others fell down any holes. "As a matter of fact, yes," A continued. "It was quite surreal actually. It took me a little while to get in as they were boarded up tight, but I found a weak point where someone had attempted entry before and I just needed to give it a bit of legwork. Inside was like I'd time traveled. There were loads of old computers. The ones where an old CRT monitor would be sat on top of a grey tower which only had a floppy drive. I was impressed with A's find. While I found darkness, no floor, pigeon carcasses, and near death, A actually found some history. I've always been fascinated with how computers have evolved over time, so I was eager to see this room, but not tonight. I was getting pretty tired. That's not all though. There were all sorts of papers related to all sorts of weird radar research and experiments. It It was literally like people had been working in there, then suddenly left and boarded up the place. I also found a souvenir to take home. He carried on, pulling an antique-looking wooden box from his bag. It's never usually good to take things from a place like this, be alarmed. That might still belong to someone. Anything inside? I'm sure it's fine, B. It's not like the place is being actively guarded, and if someone wanted it, they would have come to collect it already. I explained. I was curious about the box. In fact, I'd say I was drawn to it. I wanted to see what was inside. But C, does the fact that it seems like the place was just abandoned in a hurry not concern you? B tried to reason, but gave in to curiosity. I guess it won't hurt to take a look. I looked on in bewilderment at B's sudden backtrack, then proceeded to open the box. As it was dark, B held out his phone to shine some of the backlight over, while A fiddled with the latch. If I had to describe the box, it was like one of those old-fashioned boxes you'd open and a ballet dancer would start spinning to a wind-up tune. A eventually pries open the box, to reveal its hollow and empty interior. There was nothing inside, apart from soft green felt at the bottom. Well, that's disappointing, I said. A and B seemed equally downtrodden. C, how did you go? A questioned me while putting his new box away, with an interrogating look on his face. The type of look where someone knows something you're hiding, but is waiting for you to either tell the truth or lie. I must admit, this unsettled me a little, as it was not like A to make a face like that. Regardless, I didn't want to tell the others about what had happened to me, what I saw and what I heard as we were so close to completing the night. I began, composed and calm, as to not show my ordeal. The building was not as interesting on the inside as it looked on the outside, although I nearly had my eye taken out by an old weighing machine, which is now broken. Oh, and there's a second floor, with no floor. I saw B raise his eyebrow. Did he just see through my story? A continued to glare at me, although it felt like he was now glaring into my soul. Something about his look was really unsettling. His eyes were dark and piercing. Trust you to be the one to nearly get injured. B chuckled. I'm surprised you didn't fall through the second floor. I know what you're like, too fast for your own good. I laughed nervously in agreement. It seemed I was safe. We all remained quiet for a few moments, but A continued to glare into my soul, and B clocked onto this. A, is everything okay, man? You don't seem to have taken your eyes off of C for a while. B probed. A's gaze temporarily relieved themselves off of me to stare directly at B, which B seemed to acknowledge. Yeah, I'm fine. Something just seems a bit off about C, don't you think? A replied, returning his gaze to me, joined this time by B. B took a moment to survey me. He looks no different to me, A, B concluded with a confused tone. Anyway, shall we get this last big one done so we can head off? I'd preferably like to leave while it's still dark. When we all started to move apprehensively on the path towards the final, biggest building, I oddly felt like a weight had been lifted off of my shoulders, which, in turn, unsettled me a little. I looked around as we walked to find that A was no longer fixated upon me. His eyes now focused on the path ahead. I find it strange how my body's sixth sense accurately picked up on that. It also increased my fear exponentially when I realized that, especially considering how I felt that eyes were upon me around the building that I had explored on my own. I was sure that it was nothing though. As we continued to walk to the building, I must admit that I felt a slight tinge of safety from the thought that if anybody was around in there, I seriously doubt that they would try anything when all three of us were there. The building would probably be quiet and just infested with pigeon shit, just like every other building. But I would soon find out how wrong I would be, especially considering how it would be the key trigger to the events which would transpire soon after our visit to the compound.